Thank you all so much for coming. We're so happy to have you. You never know this time of year in Dallas when it's 107 degrees outside, but it's nice and cool, and we've got cool drinks. We're so happy you're here today. We have had just an incredible summer with so many things going on, and this is definitely the highlight of the summer season, is doing this talk with Sedrick. But I wanted to kind of point a few things out before we get started. We have an exhibition for Sam Ravelis, which is opening 2 weeks from today, from 5 to 7, and he'll be giving remarks at 6 o'clock on that date. And the exhibition, if you want to preview it, it's already up. Sam lives in Ireland, and he's originally from El Paso. He also got his MFA from Yale, like Sedrick, and we've been working with him for about 20 years. So we're thrilled with the show, and we're excited for you to see it. We are going to, last week we were in Savannah, Georgia for the opening, the last stop of Emancipation, which was organized by Maggie Adler at the Amon Carter, and Sedrick Huckaby is in it. It opened at the Telfair Museum in Savannah a week ago, and a week from today, Letitia's going to be in an exhibition at the Schweinfurth Museum in Auburn, New York, and we're thrilled about that. And then she's going to be in an exhibition at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth later in the fall. We are, in addition to doing Sam Ravelis, we are going to have an opening for Jacob Hashimoto. It'll be his first exhibition here at the gallery with a major site-specific installation here in the main gallery. I think that opens October the 5th. And we hope you all will come for that. He will also be giving artist remarks. And following his enormous installation in here, that'll run through the end of December. Our next big show in this space will be Sedrick Huckaby. So we're very, very excited about that. I want to say just a little bit about this exhibition, which is Poetic Diversions. It's a group show that we organized, and the artists that are in this group exhibition are Shausa Z, whose work is by the Entrance Store. The sculpture, the wood sculpture, is Ursula von Reidingsvard. The framed work right here is Leonardo Drew and David Bates, and then Linda Ridgway. And we really loved doing this exhibition. Of course, a highlight was having Sedrick in this. And one of the things that prompted it is sometimes we're really inspired. The scale of this space inspires us to do ambitious projects and allows us to do ambitious projects. And one of the things that we've had here in storage at the gallery is a painting called Hidden in Plain Sight, which is, half of it is hanging behind me, and the other half of it is over here. And it is intended to be stacked. So 2 paintings on top of 2 paintings. We would have had to raise the roof to install it, but Trini Martinez had the great idea of, well, why don't we just install the upper portion, the lower portion, kind of as diptychs, so at least we can enjoy the painting, because it was here in storage. The last time it had been on view was at the the Amon Carter Museum of Art in Fort Worth in the atrium. And when we brought it in here, it was the first thing we put in this empty room, and it just knocked our socks off. And I'm so glad you're sitting here and you can just sit and look at it, because the painting is incredible in both parts. So it prompted me to ask Sedrick if he would come and visit about his quilt paintings. We are familiar with his figurative work and his quilt paintings, and this seemed like a great opportunity to talk about this particular subject. So thank you, Sedrick, for being here.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. So tell me about, when I do think about your work, the first time I met you was when we got together at the African American Museum, and you wanted to show me A Love Supreme. And so the first work of yours that I saw in person with you, they were quilt paintings. Can you tell me when quilts as a subject started in your work?
So I think even as an art student, they used to be in the background behind still lifes that I would do. I started my college education at Texas Wesleyan. And way back then, we had little studios in the houses that are across the street from Texas Wesleyan. There's a number of professors, some of which you all might know, a man named Ron Tomlinson, Jack Barnett. And I would set up still lifes, and they would be the backdrops in some of those still life paintings. And so they started, it's been in my work ever since I was young adult, very early on, painting.
What prompted you? I mean, because you don't necessarily think of a quilt when you think of a still life. I think more of objects, kind of art historically, objects on a table, floral still lifes, you know, different things like that. What prompted you? What attracted you to using a quilt in the context of a still life?
We always had them around. All of the color, all of the just the aesthetic qualities of them, they just made you know, I guess the aesthetic qualities of them in art. And so, you know, I think just perhaps that.
It was a natural, yeah. And did you, can you explain A Love Supreme? Because that's an enormous, monumental quilt painting that you did that predates this Hidden in Plain Sight. Can you kind of set the stage of creating that body of work and kind of explain what that is as we transition to this?
So, A Love Supreme was, at that point in my art career, I had discovered the quilt. I had found that quilts were enough of a subject matter to not just be background, but the subject of the quilt. And that happened probably in graduate school. And so once I got out of graduate school, I had started to do paintings of just quilts. And I had started to do paintings of quilts on a larger scale. And those larger scale quilt paintings it was a way of doing several things at one time. Number one, I found it was a way to have a discussion with the art form that my grandmother used to do. It was like an artist to artist kind of dialogue. Number two, it was a way to sort of pair representation and abstraction. The quilts look or seem very like abstract objects in nature, or they almost seem non-representational, although they're not always non-representational. Some I would categorize them more as abstract. But either way, it was a way by painting them on a large scale and sort of turning them up this way instead of, you know, the normal way we're used to looking at them. Then they became like almost like abstractions and representation objects at the same time. And then, you know, the large scale was another way of sort of aggrandizing that relationship, those pieces, and also making them more, maybe more abstract in some ways, but in other ways, it just, you know, it was about language. It was about like talking about using the quilts as a starting point to talk about, I want to say, all things. And so at the point where Love Supreme came in the picture, I had just done, spent some time in Europe, looking at old master paintings, looking at these great works from the European masters. You look at things like the Sistine Chapel, and as I was looking at some of those things, what came to mind was, at a certain point, you think, how does a person do, something like this? And it struck me when I was there, it took time. They didn't just whip this stuff out. Like, and it sounds crazy because you read about it, you understand that, but then you don't when year after year you've been making art, and or at least let me speak for myself, and you're in certain environments, and so you have to work quick. You have like a show coming, and you gotta get stuff done. And then I'm seeing this great thing that just sort of makes your heart stop. And you think, how, and the how was, they slowed down to make something. They weren't rushed like you are. They didn't live in the time that you live in. People could, and so I decided on my trip home from Europe that I wanted to make this large piece, this piece, A Love Supreme, and that it would be able to transform to different spaces. Ideally, it's sort of almost like a box, 4 20-foot long paintings, and you could enter in on all the corners. But if the room allowed, it could be one long 80-foot wall. It could be 2 40-foot long spaces. It would transform itself according to the room, according to the space. And it was about, in my mind, it started by being the quilts, by those quilts being my grandmother's quilts. So it was about love, and it was about love at levels. And so it started from the whole love that's put into a quilt making practice or something like that, to a very larger thought about love, something that's bigger than you, that surrounds you, that doesn't have a beginning, that doesn't have an ending. And as you go along, it's this great, ideal about a all-encompassing thing.
Okay, so amazing. I mean, what I'm sitting here listening to his explanation, and A Love Supreme, each panel is 20 feet long. There are 4 of them, and they represent the seasons: summer, spring, winter, and fall. And Sedrick's feeling that it's kind of there's a story that goes into this, but the spring panel now hangs in the ground floor of the new cancer building at UT Southwestern. And it was under special circumstances that was acquired by UT Southwestern for the cancer building. But the thought at the time was how wonderful and comforting that would be for that audience, and to sit and hear his explanation of what the painting and what that body of work was intended, or what it meant for him, and then to now know it hangs in the ground floor. And you can go to the new UT Southwestern. If you just go to Valet and you just pop right in, it is 20 feet long, and it is right there, and it's incredible. So that is, I love hearing that explanation of it. I'll step back just a minute before we get to this. When you decided to make the quilts the subject rather than maybe the backdrop, and you were in graduate school, was that an easy decision? Was that embraced by your peers, your professors? Were you encouraged to do that? Were you discouraged to do that? And you were at Yale, right? And this was mid-90s that you were in Yale?
I graduated in 99.
Okay, so 97 to 99 there. Was that a bold choice you were making among your peers as a subject matter? How was that received? How did you feel about it?
I think, people received it, professors and stuff, they received it well. I think it made sense, like for me, it made sense. And then when I did it, then some of my professors, I remember one of them, he named John Walker, who was very instrumental in me actually getting into Yale, because he taught at Yale and at BU, and he wrote a letter of recommendation. And I remember him looking at the painting, and he thought that he was very positive about it, although he didn't know much about the history of quilts. He just felt like it was about family. And the way it was painted, you know, a lot of people, they were supportive of that.
And what about the history of the quilts? What inspires you with that aspect of the quilts?
So it's a number of things that come together that intrigue me about the quilts and inspire me about them. One, as I said earlier, my grandmother was a quilter. I came to discover this was her art form. And so it was a way of having a dialogue, an artist-to-artist dialogue with her. But beyond that, in college, I started to, I took a course there called the Black Atlantic Visual Tradition. And I know that, I think that, was that the name of the?
Very close.
Okay.
To the exhibition that was just at the Dallas Museum of Art.
And in it, you know, we looked at aesthetics that were African aesthetics, and followed those aesthetics as they moved across the world and across the continents and had influence on other continents, other places. And it was sort of an eye-opening thing. It was like, whoa, you know, I could clearly see how those quilts had this connection that went back. You know, it had to do with like, and you know, there is this more or less quality to it, but some of the, sometimes it was the color, like the really vibrant color. You'll find that kind of vibrancy of color in many of the cultures that come from, that have an African influence. Some of it had to do with the way sometimes the patchwork would happen, or the way that they dealt with pattern. They had a very sort of complex way of doing pattern. It wasn't just like the normal kind of symmetrical thing. They would do asymmetrical things, and it was a complicated sort of mix of patterning. And there was a sense of improvisation in some of the African black quilts. And many times, if you ever talk to the makers, or at least like with my family, and I've talked to my aunts about some of the quilts they made with their mother, she was like the lead person, and she'd be talking to them, and they would all be sort of working on a quilt, and they would make suggestions, and they would like offer suggestions in there, and there was a give and a take that was going on. And so it was very organic in its process, sometimes being put together. One could almost argue there's a little bit of call and response in there. It would be an argument, but it definitely, there was like improvisation in the way that the way that it was put together. And you know, like at the end of the day, one of the aesthetics that constantly come up in black culture as we go back is, and probably poorer cultures around the world, use what you got. Like, you know, people didn't waste things. They were useful and like resourceful in reusing things and putting them together. And that whole sort of use what you got aesthetic, that's what we see now in some of the best of the folk art that we like. I mean, even here, if you see, I'm looking at that David Bates over there. He's influenced by some folk artists, who have a use what you got aesthetic, and they're, you know, and it definitely, like, the black artists had that in their work and in their aesthetic. So there was a number of things that qualities that I saw in this art that I felt like it went right down the line, and by me making paintings using these quilts, I was touching on those things, on that history, on that legacy.
I wrote down, before you said that, I wrote the everyday. Like, you really embrace the everyday, you know, and want to, I mean, I think as you're talking about this, it makes me think that you really want to honor it to a certain degree, the work that goes into these quilts and the artistry, not just your artistic painting, but the hands that have gone in to make them and celebrate them. And it seems like that's a lot of what you do in your figurative painting and in the quilts, that you're celebrating the everyday.
Yeah, definitely that. And kind of like, you know, being connected to the whole sort of flow of that, you know. With some of the other work, with this work, there is a lot about legacy. There's a lot about, like, influence of not just, you know, of everyday people who are not everyday, but,
Right.
you know.
But you want to celebrate them. Well, tell us about this painting and how you came up with the idea that you wanted to create this 4-panel composition.
So, sort of interesting. So, first of all, everything is always like an amalgamation of, like, influences and things coming together. I was working in quilts. I was working with quilts. I was using those quilts to create conversation about life. But this, so this particular piece, there's a number of things. One is a dream that I had, and then another is the name of the piece is Hidden in Plain Sight. Some of y'all might be remember that book written by Isabel Wilkerson called Hidden in Plain Sight. It was a wonderful author. If you hadn't read her books, check them out. Warmth of Other Suns, Cast, I think is one of them. Anyway, she wrote one called Hidden in Plain Sight, and had to do with the idea that some of the quilts, some of the slaves would hide messages or encode like the pathway to go on the Underground Railroad into some of the quilts, and they would hang them out, and runaways would understand, like, some of the places that they had to go. And the whole Hidden in Plain Sight had to do with the idea of the encoded quilt. And there's been a lot of, like, debate about whether that existed, if it didn't exist. Isabel provides a lot of evidence for it. So there's that idea, and then, like, there was this dream that I had, like, so in the dream, there was a church. I was in a church. It was a large kind of church, almost like the Vatican or something. And on my way out, there was this large sort of vortex, and I don't know, like, it's hard to explain. It was in the air, okay, and it was turning, and it was like clouds or something, like it was just turning in the air. and it wasn't clouds. It was just like a turning of the wind in the air, and it turned faster and faster. And then little by little, this light came up from the bottom, and it was like a fire stick, and it lit, going through the middle, and then coming through the middle from the side, and it got brighter and brighter, and it just stood there. And then when I woke up, you know, I could almost still see like the light in the center. And it was so impressive. It really made an impression on me then, and I did sketches of it in the sketchbook. And so those ideas came together in this piece, Hidden in Plain Sight. It had to do with the idea of, like, you know, thinking about runaway slaves seeking freedom, and that these pieces could encode ways to tell them how to get there. And whether that was actual or not, I just thought that's an interesting idea. And if we lay it, when it's all layered together, I thought this piece could kind of speak to that.
So if you can imagine that that's the top half of the painting and this is the bottom, you can almost see a circular movement of the folds, and that it would be swirling around. If you are familiar with Sedrick's work, you might know that his figurative paintings, his portraits, and his quilts, they're all painted from life. He rarely paints something from memory. So I'd love to know the logistics. A lot of people think artists have studios that are about the size of this room, but in reality, they very, very rarely have studios that are even large enough to have one of these panels. So I'm pretty sure that Sedrick didn't have the opportunity to look at this stacked in his studio. He had to imagine it. And can you tell us how in the world, and I love it because I asked you this question, and I love it. I said, you painted this painting, this 4-part painting, that one panel couldn't get through some doorways, definitely couldn't go in a regular Suburban or something. You know, you painted, and did you know where it was going to go? Or did you just make it? And Sedrick said, well, I just made it. It's enormous, you know, even by our standards, it's enormous. And I think it's so exciting when artists are making work because they have to. It's like he had to make this painting. And I want you to share a little bit of like the logistics. Like, so you have this idea, you do these sketches, and you think, at what point did you say, I'm not gonna make this 8 feet tall by, or 6 feet tall by 4 feet. I'm gonna make each panel, that size, not the whole painting. Like, how did you come to this scale?
I wanted to make it that size where it was sort of overwhelming and large. The same feel I got from that dream where this thing was there. It had to be large, had to be sort of, and you kind of get lost in all of the psychedelic qualities of the color, and then you start to see what you're talking about is that movement that goes around, and as you back, it's one thing when you see it from afar, it's another thing when you come up close and you start to see how all the marks start to, in some senses, fall apart, but not always. So the scale was just a part of the idea.
Right, and is it a 1-to-1? Is the scale about the size of this quilt?
The scale is a little larger
Okay.
than the actual quilts.
Got it.
And yeah, like I couldn't work on it, like I had to work on it in pieces. So I could work on this and one panel, and then on the other panel, I could put them together to see them together, but I would work on them individually, and they would go together more when I'm working right on the line in between them. But if I'm just working over here, not necessarily a need to like be right there in front of that one, but there was a need to put them together so I can step away. But I would have to open the door. I have a barn door that I was working on, and so I would have to open the barn door, step outside of the door to look in to see two. And so in order to see how the one goes on the top to that one, I would have to turn one to the side and put the other down and put them on side of each other and kind of like work them together. And then at a certain point, I could just work on the one. You know, it's a strange way to work on something, but you just, whenever they come together, you have to work them together, and then you could work on the one, but you work them together. I don't know if that explains it or not, but.
Amazing. How did you choose the 4 quilts? Is there a significance of any particular quilt or
The
history
whole,
of any?
everything is layered. It's all layered, all of the ideas. Like, it's layered idea up on top of idea where they join. So, for instance, the cross and the crossroads that you hear about in Black culture are joined, right? And then with the quilts, there's this whole idea of really like a marriage. There is, and I won't tell you which ones, but you'll know one. There is one that's older, really older, one that's newer than them all, one that's borrowed, and one that's blue. And this one is a wedding quilt with the ring interlooping circles, and so they're tied together in different ways. Yeah.
Tell us about the brushwork and the color choice. And you know, it's interesting. We all recognize you as a representational painter, but when you're sitting this close and looking at the works, and you said earlier the idea of representational versus abstraction, I mean, there's so many passages of abstraction when you're close to these works. And of course you were probably in your studio in the barn painting. I mean, you're painting right in front of you, but then stepping back. But can you tell us some about kind of how you look at these and how you look at the brushwork? And
yeah, so there's the idea of I sort of learned art from a traditional background of like the masters and composing a piece, the formal side of it, sort of having strong composition or thinking compositionally about everything, formally about everything. So there's the whole sort of formal of it from a distance that is thought about kind of early on, but then there's the changes that happen in the process. And if there's a place for a type of improvisation, it's probably in a square about this big. In that square is where there's a kind of freedom, where sort of I'm sort of letting loose and trying to figure out how to paint it and what to do and make all of these different decisions. But then, you know, it's about like being very loose, you know, in the square about this size, and then having order from a distance. And it's constantly back and forth. And, you know, that's what it is.
Amazing. Incredible. What do you especially love about the quilts? Like when you, let me ask you another question. Again, we think about your figurative work. The exhibition that we're going to have right after the first of the year will be predominantly figurative. Is there are you in a different mindset when you're painting a quilt painting versus a figurative painting? I know there are plenty of figurative paintings with quilts, but if you're doing a pure portrait figurative painting versus a quilt, is it a different mindset for you?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So there is no replacing like somebody sitting in front of you looking at you and you're trying to draw or paint them. Like you just can't. But there is something about the quilts that for me speak to figurative, like a kind of figurative thing. Maybe it's the volumetric qualities of them, the folds, the wrinkles, the turns. There's something about them in that sense that speaks to the figure, and also, you know, there's the whole. It's not literal, but it's a thought. But there's the whole idea of the hands that made them. Like they're these very touched objects that you're dealing with in a certain sense, with touch. So, yes and no. You know, it's like, in some senses, they're always usually about people, you know, about a person, about a people on some level. And then other times, you know, they get broader.
What is it like when you're doing a portrait, you're painting your figurative work and you have a sitter? Because you kind of said it's really different than having someone just sitting there and you're painting them. And what is your mindset when you're working with a sitter?
There's the whole psychology of a person. You know, like just painting a person, there's a lot of psychology involved in painting a person. But if there's somebody sitting in front of you, then the level of psychology just picked up like triple, because literally, you know, that person is right there. They're, you know, living, moving, breathing in front of you, and that brings even another level of energy into it. But when you're making an image, just making an image of a person, like there's so much psychology to that. And, you know, there's all the guys who art history, you know, the figure is dead and all of these things. That'll never happen. It will never happen because people, I want to say because people are interested in people, and that won't stop.
That leads into, you just completed a Fulbright fellowship in Nacimiento, Mexico, where you went and created 101 portraits from 101 people sitting in front of you and doing their portraits. Can you say a little bit, and that's what we'll be showing after the first of the year. Can you say a little bit about that experience and going to another country and a language that you didn't speak and doing 101 portraits in 3 months, 4 months? I can't remember.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's one thing not to know, you know, the language. Good thing. I wish he was here. Ricky was there with me, a fellow artist, former student of mine who could translate for me, and that was great. I can't imagine. I could not have done the work without it. but at some level, it's still the same what I just said. People are people. And like, once you start communicating with people and you're looking and you're working, at some point, you know, you're dealing, like, it's the same. It's the same.
When you were in Mexico, you had gone to a town in Mexico that celebrates Juneteenth.
Yes.
And that was part of the initial interest of going there. And when you were there, you discovered a lot of traditions that were similar to traditions here, and that people had from their ancestors, from their families. Did you come across quilt making or quilts within Nacimiento, or did that come up as conversation?
It did, and it was one of the things I didn't go there looking for like that. I didn't think about that at all. I'm going to draw people of this community who celebrate Juneteenth. You know, as you go along, you start to discover, hey, they sing songs like the songs we sing here, and different, you know, they had this celebration of Juneteenth. But there was a thing with quilts that came up because people are people. Somebody looked on, when I was going over to draw them, they looked me up and they saw some of the large quilts. And it reminded them of their grandmother's quilts. And they started telling me about it when I came over, and piqued my interest. Y'all sang some of the same songs we sing. You celebrate Juneteenth like we celebrate Juneteenth. Wonder if those quilts have any relationship. And I've only seen that one individual's grandmother's quilts. From the look of that one, yes, but the question probably is whether it was a larger thing that like a number of people did at a certain point in their history, or was it just, you know, this particular person. But I saw some similarities with that, and I never thought about that. I think about it now because I had read about this community, I met the community, I read about what other people said, but I didn't hear anybody say anything about a quilting tradition that they might have that could be connected to the quilting tradition that we have. So, yeah.
Amazing. That's great. I'm going to ask one, let me check my time, and then we'll have a few questions. I could talk to Sedrick for days because there's so many different things that he is involved with, and from the quilt paintings to the figurative paintings to the Fulbright Fellowship to the project in Mexico that he just did, to the painting of Opal Lee that just went to the National Portrait Gallery and was acquired there, and well, I'll stop there, but there's another really wonderful one that's been acquired by a museum, but I'm going to let them make the announcement. I have to, because you're wearing the shirt, for Kinfolk House, and I feel like when we're sitting in front of quilts and talking about your grandmother and we have an audience, I think it's important to acknowledge your grandmother and her influence, and tell the audience about Kinfolk House and what you and Letitia have created in Fort Worth.
We have a collaborative art space called Kinfolk House. It's my grandmother's old house, and it's been transformed into this art space where we do projects. We have coordinated to do about 3 projects a year. That's the normal pace of things. Usually it's 3 artists. We normally look for 1 national, local, and regional artist to create a collaboration in the house. The whole idea for the house is Once my grandmother died, I got the house. It was about how to use that space to both be something that could engage the local community, be something that would do it with art, but also be something that was a little closer to the people. And so it's about sort of an artistic engagement, but on a community level, but have art that is created in a level that's as high as anything. We've been, I think we're about 3 years in the making, and if you all can look us up and make it there. Many of you I've seen over there. Many of you all have already come, and continue to come. We want to continue to grow. We want to continue to engage. We want to. We hope that we can turn the whole world into kinfolk.
Yeah, it's incredible. So Kinfolk House has a website. It's a nonprofit. You can contribute and support it. It's completely self-funded by Letitia and Sedrick, and it is one of the most, I think it's the best art space in Texas. It's a 100-year-old house. You walk in, it's hardwood floors. It's the most authentic, best space for looking at art that I can think of, and there's an enormous backyard. They have workshops, a community library, classes for the kids in the neighborhood. I mean, it is the most accessible, wonderful space that there is, and I highly recommend going there and supporting it. And Sedrick and Letitia, they not only have pursued their own careers, but they are so committed to this community and to making it a better place. And you're so giving of your, whether it is professors, as you both are and have been, or with kinfolk, you both give and give and give, and you've had such a huge impact on the community, and we're so glad you all stayed in Fort Worth and you're not living somewhere else. I will end on that. Why choose? You went to school, you were in Boston, then you were in New Haven. You decided to come back to Fort Worth, probably because of family. But that's a decision as an artist. You know, how did you come to that decision to stay in Fort Worth and have your career?
Yeah, so when I came back, I wanted to do work about family, which I found that I was always doing, but trying to do it in other places. I didn't plan on staying. I was gonna come here, do that project, and then once I was done, I thought I would be back to going to New York. Yeah. But it's just the way things happen, because after sitting for a while, working for a while, met Letitia, and started kind of reconnecting with the community more. It makes it, I'll say it like this, funny thing. Any of y'all used to ever watch Gomer Pyle? Okay, so what was that show called?
Andy Griffin. Was it Andy Griffith? Gomer on that?
No.
Yeah. No.
The
No,
show
he
with
wasn't
Gomer
on
Pyle.
here. Yeah, he was the, yeah. Huh? Okay.
I don't know what the show was called. So
Yes, Gomer Pyle.
there was a show on where Gomer, he had met, there was a criminal, and the criminal had took over like this little store on this corner, and it was connected to the bank, and he was trying to cut through the bank wall, the wall in the little like restaurant, in order to get into the vault. And so Gomer caught him in there, and he was like, "Oh, you're gonna open up a restaurant? Okay, you gotta get some eggs in here. You gotta get some stuff." And so Gomer starts helping them start the restaurant, and he's kind of entertaining Gomer because he wants to get in that vault, you know. So he keeps working with Gomer. Gomer gets things started. People start coming. Next thing you know, it's like a bustling little business that he's working, and he's constantly working trying to get in the vault. At a certain point, I don't know what happened with the vault thing, but he ends up looking around toward the end of the show, and it's like, kind of like, why am I trying to break this vault when there's this bustling business that's right here that we've started, you know? And it was kind of like that. It's like, you know, you're after these things in art and in life, but after I got back and Letitia and I are married and we're starting on a family, and I'm reconnecting with all of these people in community, and I realized what I had with community. It's kind of like, why are you going over there again? You know? And so, yeah.
Love it. Well, I'm glad. Well, I think we have time for a couple of questions. If anyone has a question for Sedrick. Yes, Beckett?
Thank you so much. Oh,
Sorry. Okay.
What is the significance of the pink circles on the quilt?
It's just a part of, you know, those are the wedding quilt, the interlocking loops, and so, you know, there's that, and then there's aesthetically how they connect with the whole of it.
Beckett?
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this discussion. And I guess my question was, you were talking about working on the two canvases separately and then only bringing them together to do the final interconnecting part of it. But what I find interesting is even though they're interconnected in the middle, it seems like there's two completely separate worlds. This one has more of a floor beneath it with a purplish lavender wall, whereas this other one, it's completely covering, so we don't know what it is, but there's just this contrast, yet they're still connected in the middle. So could you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, so that's what we had. Yes, he's a genius. What it was about was having these, there's these strong breaks between the quilt, like that strong blue versus all of the movement in this crazy quilt. Some of them, sometimes the movement slows down more, sometimes it gets really quick, but it's about all of these contrasts. These contrasts between like having various kinds of contrasts yet being united. So I was always fighting to create this piece that was rather broken in terms of like it's four separate quilts and they sort of block beside each other, yet when you look at it, making it to where it has this holistic quality to it. And some of the things that gives it its wholeness, its unity, are the constant light. They were created in the same light. That fold that goes throughout, you'll find how it connects them all, even though they're very different. How they have they're composed to where it creates this interesting balance to it, yet it's not so centrical that it becomes boring. Like it's kind of like weirdly in the center, and that's why you it's almost. Oh, sorry. Okay. So it's almost like a globe, right? It's almost like a globe. Like if you're looking at a globe, it's this round thing, but it's kind of slightly off center, and then it has that arc on it. So it's not just a center a center ball, but it's a little more slightly more complicated than that. And that was this composition. Some of those decisions go with it meaning or message, but some of it has to do with it being a work of art. Like, for example, if you're writing music, you go to compose it in such a way that it grabs the audience, and it has this sort of way in which you make it interesting as a composer. You know, you're putting it together, you're listening to the sound of it, and you don't want to just order it to where the audience sort of knows exactly like how it is. That's why it's symmetrical, but then it's not. You know, it's a little bit off kilter. And so that speaks to that a little bit. I don't know if it speaks to that exactly. What you will find is that it is like there's always decisions for me to make how far to go and when I can go further, and maybe when I can, like, if this blue is not working, or these panels which I put on the ground, I felt like it needed grounding right there. But if I was looking at that, and those are an example of something that could almost not be there, right? Like, who you look at them and think, what significance are those in the painting for? Like, they could almost not be there, but they're there in terms of like the balance of the piece, and to get it balanced right. So there, I mean, wholly for that.
Thank you.
How long did it take you to do these 4 panels?
Ah,
And were they the only things you were working on? For a period
no,
of time?
like I'm usually never just working on one thing at a time. It's always like a number of things happening. And because of that, things take a little longer. Like if you were just working on one, it probably would go a lot faster. I'm trying to remember how long it took. Might say a couple of years.
Yeah.
Sedrick, I was wondering if you ever talked to your grandmother about her decision-making in relation to the design of the quilts and the fabrics that were used. A lot of times those were from clothing that have been a part of hers or a part of her family's. And did she make these decisions like, I want this piece that was my husband's shirt next to this that was my skirt? You know, or was it just like the design of this pink to this blue, and how do you know about her decision making?
I do know that it was things like pieces of clothing and fabric that were like from around the family, the household. I've talked to my aunts about, like, cause they helped her. And but in terms of like certain ideas of you know, putting an uncle's shirt by a aunt's, this or that, I no, I don't know. I don't know. Yes.
I mean, I'm an admirer of your first of all, thanks for your kinfolk house. I enjoyed going there. My dogs enjoyed meeting the animals of your neighbors and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun to go there. But I would say, you know, I'm an admirer of your portraitures a lot, frankly. But this is, you know, to me, it's a different style of painting. To be honest, it's representational, but it shows a different, you know, side of your skill level, obviously, I think. And I guess I'm wondering, you know, when I look at some of these folds in the fabric, you know, this is so, you know, expertly done, in my opinion. And, you know, this was obviously done after you went to Europe. When you did A Love Supreme, was that also done after you went to Europe, or was it done, I mean, you were doing these quilts when you were in MFA school, so that was before you went to Europe, I guess. So Did your trip to Europe and studying, because some of these folds look like the Reminal Master, actually, in my opinion. And I'm wondering, did your approach to painting the quilts before or after change at all, having gone to Europe and seeing what the old masters were doing? Or maybe this is completely unrelated, I don't know.
So what I think you'll find is that as you step closer to them and check it out, they're pretty loose up close. As you scoot apart from it, it comes together. And what's happened over the course of my career is the looseness of that has gotten, I keep pushing. I've pushed the grounds on that and pushed the grounds on that, and I'm always pushing to create this this contrast or this balance between looseness and order. As I've gone along, like, you know, I'll push a little further with it. I'll push a little further with it. You know, and I still think that there is further layers that I can go with that will invite in the looseness of the paint to allow the process, the paint, to be more evident in the surface, but at the same time still have a wonderful sense of representation. Here, you see that, but it's a little tighter than maybe some of the ones you're thinking about. But if as you go up to it, you'll see the relationship.
Okay, all right, cool.
Cedric, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, we have one more?
One more.
One more. I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't see it. Eli, yeah, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned like you painted these sort of in the same light, and I'm just picturing those two stacked on top and imagining how tall it would be. And you mentioned like how you're turning something that's usually horizontal into this vertical form, and the Love Supreme was a striking idea because it's like kind of becomes an installation at that point.
Yeah.
So I was curious to hear, like, what your perspective is on, like, being a painter, but wanting to make a painting that has a affective dimension to it, where it's like has to do with scale or the space and transforming that space rather than just like an image.
Great question. Simply because you're right. Always, there have been over the years the whole idea of the paintings and all of the formal things coming together to affect like the way it's perceived. And one of those things, even in this, is not just size and scale. Like, see how this painting is being shown, like this part. Part of something that I've thought about is how there are other things or other ways that the painting is still just a normal painting, but it operates like more than that. For example, when there's a shiny floor, I'm thinking about how this reflects down into the floor to give more of an image than just the image we see here. So I think about these and like, for instance, you could show a half of that, and if that floor is shiny enough, we see another half shine down in the floor. And so then it affects the room. Like the room is a part of how you see it. And that's in that Love Supreme, it was the same too. Like, it's more than just a painting because it surrounds you. Like it becomes an installation. And later on, that type of thinking has entered into new work where there's a painting and a sculpture. And the surface plane of the painting is just like a portal, you know, between this painting and the sculpture. So, yeah.
And your installation, you did recently a project row house with the birds and the bird cages. is also just the idea of an installation and an environment, and just his going into sculpture, you know, starts really talking about environment and space.
It's like the piece is pushing out into the space, and it confounds the difference. Like there's an imagined space, and then there's the actual space. And the ideal is that your mind plays between the actual space and the imagined space. Like some kind of way you go in and out, and you think about that imagined thing and then this real thing, and we sort of break the plane in our minds between the painted thing and the reality or the real. So, thank you.
Go ahead. Did your grandmother see your quilt paintings?
She saw early paintings where quilts would have been in the background. She never saw the quilts as subject for in and of themselves.
Well, thank you all. I want to point out that there is another quilt painting entitled Filthy Rags of Splendor that is on the other side of this wall. And since Sedrick mentioned his aunts, we have 3 portraits of his aunts in the viewing room across the courtyard, which we will pull out so you can see these ladies who I'm assuming quilted with your grandmother. Are these the right aunts that I'm referring to?
No.
No, different aunt, different side of the family.
Those are the aunts of Big Mama's house.
Those are okay. Those are different aunts, but they're very impressive. So, Sedrick, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you all for coming.